Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Goodness. So, what is the future of immigrants in a foreign land here on? Why do I ask that question specifically today? There are parts of the world is divided on this very topic, immigrants. The fatal stabbing of 3 young girls at a dance class in a seaside town of Southport, north of England, which was later followed by a worst unrest the UK has seen in more than a decade. 8 children and 2 adults who were trying to protect the children were also injured in this incident that took place at the Taylor Swift themed dance and yoga event. The violence in towns and cities across England and in Northern Ireland has been fueled by misinformation online, with the far-right and anti-immigrant sentiment. So what was the theme of the misinformation? Post the attack, social media posts falsely speculated that the suspect was an asylum seeker who arrived in UK on a boat in 2023, with an incorrect name being widely circulated, calling the attacker a Muslim immigrant. Police urged the public not to spread unconfirmed speculations and false information. In some media outlets reported, the suspect was born in Wales to Rwandan parents. Police later arrested 17-year-old from a village nearby and that they were not treating the incidents as terror-related. The horror of attack in Southport is washing over me continuously, and I am just completely in shock. The loss of life and innocence and the horrendous trauma inflicted on everyone who was there, the families and the first responders. These were just little kids at a dance class. I am at a complete loss for how to ever convey my sympathies to these families, Taylor Swift wrote on Instagram. How spread was the misinformation? The day after the incident, at least 27 million impressions on social media for the post stating or speculating that the attacker was Muslim, a migrant, refugee, or a foreigner based on research performed by a researcher. Is this the first time children were under attack in UK? In the past, to recall a few incidents, several children, including an 8-year-old girl, were killed in a terror attack at a concert of pop singer Ariana Grande in Manchester in 2017. And 16 children aged between 5 and 6 were murdered in a school shooting in a Scottish town in Dunbayne in 1996. The massacre stunned the country and led to the ban on a private ownership of handguns in the mainland Britain. And as we are looking at this case, just been reported, there has been a stabbing of a 11-year-old girl, and she and a 34-year-old woman with minor injuries are being hospitalized. A man believed to be in between 20 and 30-year-old has stabbed this young child and the 34-year-old woman. While we record this, we also just been made aware that there is another incident that has happened in UK. A man has been arrested after stabbing an 11-year-old girl needing hospital treatment and a 34-year-old woman with minor injuries, police says. 32-year-old man has swiftly been arrested, and police say that it is nothing to do with terror. Investigations are currently underway. A 29-year-old guard who was guarding that place by the name of Abdullah said to an agency, "I heard a scream. At that moment, I saw there was one person, roughly in his 30s. He was like stabbing a kid. I jumped on him, held the hand in which he was carrying a knife, and just put him down on the floor and just held him and took the knife away from him. Then a couple of more people joined in as well, and we just held him down until the police came, and he was taken into the custody by the police." this is the latest on another story developing out of UK. So, in the latest attack that we were looking at, the 17-year-old boy attacking the 3 children, and unfortunately the 3 are now dead. Officially, a little information was released about the suspect, other than that he was a 17-year-old, because laws in the UK make it a criminal offence to identify a suspect who is a minor until legal proceedings begin. Police later confirmed that the person arrested was born in UK and motive of the attack is still unknown. So post this incident, more than 1,000 people attended a vigil for the victim in Southport, who laid wreaths, toys, candles in an emotional tribute to the 3 girls who were killed. Later on, the violence broke out near a local mosque. Far-right rioters attacked police, set fire to police vehicles, threw stones at the mosque and looted shops, injuring more than 50 police officers, ended up with 600 arrests, including children of 11-year-old. While some have been intent on violence, there were initially also people with concerns about immigration wanting to exert their right to peacefully protest. One of those peaceful protesters mentioned, scenes at the hostel housing asylum seekers were absolutely barbaric, and this is not what we are here for. In several cities, violent groups have clashed with counter-protesters. In Bristol, anti-racism protesters said they locked arms to stop rival demonstrators from storming a building housing asylum seekers. Local MP from the Southport area said thugs have travelled to the town to use the death of 3 children for their own political purposes. While the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, denounced the marauding mobs on the street of Southport. As far as the far right is concerned, this is coordinated, this is deliberate. Starmer told the press conference, "This is not a protest that just got out of hand. It is a group of individuals who are absolutely bent on violence." Starmer's office said he would tell police leaders that while the right to peaceful protest must be protected at all costs, he will be clear that criminals who exploit the right in order to sow hatred and carry out violent acts will face the full force of the law. While the UK government said it was also working with the social media companies to ensure misinformation and disinformation is removed. As the violence spread more widely, thousands gathered near Starmer's Downing Street office and residents in London shouting, "Save our kids. We want our country back," and "Stop the boats." Protesters also threw flares and smoke canisters towards the Downing Street. London Metropolitan Police said 111 people had been arrested for offences including violent disorder and assaults on police officers. This is interesting to note. What a turn of events from the era of British colonization. In that era, most countries wanting to free from British colonization used slogans like, "We will not bow down," "Our land and our rights," "Down with imperialism," as part of their revolutionary activities. And today, Brits are using these slogans to build a country without immigrants. Anyhow, how did the violence spread in UK? UK police said the violence was believed to have involved supporters of the now disbanded far-right group, the English Defence League. There had been discussions of the rally on a regional anti-immigration channel on the Telegram messaging app. The day after the Southport riot, violent protests in London, Hartlepool and Manchester broke out, linking to Southport incident. More took place throughout the week, with many targeting mosques, hotels and housing asylum seekers. It is important to note, while there was no single organizing force at work, but a clear pattern of influences driving a message for people to gather for protest. Multiple influences within different circles amplified false claims about the identity of the attacker, reaching a large audience, including ordinary people without any connection to far-right individuals and groups. So what's the adverse effect of technology here? Far-right activist and convicted criminal Tommy Robinson, who posted inflammatory messages on X platform, the former Twitter, on his nearly 1 million followers while he was on holidays in Cyprus. He said, "More evident to suggest Islam is a mental health issue rather than a religion of peace. And they are replacing the British nation with hostile, violent, aggressive migrants. Your children don't matter to Labour government." Followed by the post by Lord Simon, another influencer, who was among the first to publicly call for national-wide protest. Director of Public Prosecutions in UK told, "Prosecutors are considering terrorism offences for some suspects, alongside the extradition of influencers allegedly playing a role in a disorder from abroad." So, should this incident be seen as a threat of immigrants or a continuous rise in knife crimes in UK? Knife crimes have risen across the country over the past decade. A number of knife crimes in England rose to about 48,000 in April 2024, from about 27,000 in the year April 2014, so difference within 10 years, according to the official of National Statistics. Guns are heavily restricted in the UK. Firearms used for hunting are tightly regulated. Restricting knives is trickier, but the government is trying, some say. It is already illegal to sell a knife to someone younger than 18 or to carry one in public without a good reason, such as for work or religious purposes. Many end up in the hands of children as they can be cheap and easy to get. It is very important to note a significant portion of the committers of the crimes are teenagers and youth. Let's look at some of the examples. A teenage girl in Wales was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after stabbing a student and 2 teachers at a secondary school in April 2024. Ronan Kanda was killed in case of a mistaken identity. One of his attackers was then a 16-year-old, bought a sword online and picked it up at the post office. He brought his mother's ID to pass this post officer's security check, but no one asked to see it. So there are many speculations as to what leads to knife crimes. Poverty. Some say law is weak and people are not scared to go to jail as there are no longer prison sentences to deter the young. There is a massive egocentric culture driving this, as some say. To show how big a man you are, some perform this activity. Kids have got this wrong idea that this is cool to do so. And there are significant issues with mental health problem. And there are some who has been outcasted and excluded from education. A more likely explanation is the illicit drug market, which has become more competitive and more violent in the last decade. Increased global cocaine production and trafficking means that while UK border forces are intercepting more than ever, more cocaine reached the street in the decade before the pandemic compared to preceding years. This period also saw a significant evolution in domestic drug market, including the emergence of country lines with strong links to gang violence and knife crime. Cocaine consumption by 16 to 24-year-old in England and Wales increased 90% between 2012 to 2019. A trend is similar to that in a recorded knife crime. So, can this be controlled? Over the last 20 years, number of steps have been taken to prevent knife crime, included a mixture of legal measures, like the Offensive Weapons Act, and law enforcement initiatives such as targeted operations to take knives off streets. More recent policies have focused on a public health approach designed to tackle root cause. The most high-profile example is the creation of 18 violence reduction units in England and Wales. So, has this stopped the knives' availability in the market? Nope. If dangerous knives were unavailable, there is not a next best alternative weapon that does similar damage as easily. Key cause of increased knife crime is almost certainly their easy access via online sales. Competitive online markets make knife purchases cheap and easy with little friction. Buying in person requires knowledge, travel time, and effort to locate the shop. Online retailers also need to take responsibility if their sales are causing violence and death. Would they? Police should focus on restricting access to knives, especially dangerous knives, as it has with guns. Well, some of you might say, well, what about the kitchen knives? Yet the kitchen knives still account for most knife murders. Kitchen knives with rounded tips should be promoted and pointed knives should be restricted. Now, another most important question to ask here is, why was it easy for the influencers to direct this incident towards immigrants? This question can't be simply answered without getting a wide picture of Europe on this issue, correct? Well, what is the sentiment on immigration in Europe? Anti-immigrant sentiment in Europe is rising. In some countries, millennials and Gen Zs showed greater antipathy than Gen X. According to the independent recent study, the young are more anti-immigration than older generation in some parts of Europe. In another analysis by Pan-EU polling reveals that in some countries, typically those in Eastern Europe, negative attitudes to immigrations are more commonly held by Gen Z or millennials than Gen X or the baby boomers. The findings come ahead of an expected surge in support for far-right parties in European Parliament elections in June, and follow on recent national elections in the Netherlands, Finland, Sweden, France, in which young people voted in unprecedented numbers for nationalist and Eurocentric parties. This geographic detail is absolutely fundamental to understand the problem, since a particular form of English nationalism has been festering in our politics for some time. Brexit is part of the picture, but so is the slightly more mundane concept for devolution. Scotland and Wales are culturally and politically different since the 1997 Act that gave them their own governments. England, by contrast, has no legislation of its own. This appears to have contributed to feelings of resentment and fueled anti-immigrant sentiment. It is very important to note this now. Mere weeks before the Southport attack, the 17-year-old related attack, another tragedy happened in the British town. A white man killed a young black boy called Daniel with a sword. The murder triggered no rioting whatsoever. While the white man was treated as an exceptional case, the Southport attacker was treated as representative of an entire group of people. This automatic psychological response explains how people can see the self and the in-group as complex and fluid. For example, not all white people are criminals, but frame the out-group as homogeneous and fixed. This can lead to some people casting all black men as dangerous, Muslims as terrorists, asylum seekers as opportunistic, and refugees as taking jobs and healthcare resources, justifying the dislike and even hatred of the outgroup. This in-group, out-group mentality is in evidence in other part of British life beyond the riots. So it has been argued that this has created ideal conditions for scapegoating and racism. This raises concerns around those thinking of migrating as a choice and those who have to make the difficult journey across the borders as that's the only viable option to survive. According to Hague, at the International Organization for Migration, migration is inevitable in view of driving forces in an interconnected world, necessary if skills are to be available, jobs to be filled, and economies to flourish, and desirable for the contributions that migrants make both to countries of origin and destination. The time has now approached for us to look at immigration differently. Here's why I think. Changing climate will make earning a living difficult for many people, and natural disasters will render some currently populated areas dangerous or even uninhabitable. Crime and poor job prospect that could drive people from their home country. The global retreat of democracy could yield more civil conflict and an increase in forced displacement trends. In among the above shifts in the world, when Donald Trump was in office, who pursued zero-tolerance immigration policy. Following his departure, the US has continued his restrictive approach using new policy, which since 2020 has allowed the US to remove people who were recently in the country where a communicable disease was present. Critics see this as a border enforcement mechanism masquerading as a COVID-19 measure. Under first the Republican administration and then under the Democratic one. US Customs and Border Protection has used it to expel more than 1.7 million would-be immigrants and asylum seekers along the southwestern US border. Contrast recent American gatekeeping at the Mexican border with Colombia's more welcoming response to the mass displacement of people from Venezuela, its economically and politically troubled neighbor. Colombian president recently offered 10-year residency permit to nearly 1 million Venezuelans living in Colombia. In Europe, like America, individual nations differ significantly in their willing to admit migrants. More than 1.1 million people applied for asylum in European Union countries in 2016. Although 61% of cases received a positive decision overall, largely driven by Germany, which issued approvals in 69% of its 630 cases. France approved only 33%, United Kingdom 32% when it was part of the European Union, and Greece was just 24%. But the same welcome mat can just be easily rolled up as rolled out. As citizens in many European democracies soared in immigration in the second half of 2010, even Germany denied more than 50% of first-time applicants in 2020. The initial European response to Ukrainians fleeing the Russian invasion has been generous. But just a month into the brutal conflict, officials in Moldova, the Ukraine's smallest neighbor, are already saying that refugees are putting their country under strain. Past experience elsewhere in the world suggests that host nation resolved to host a huge exodus may not last as long as the crisis will. Thus, the immigration fixes one side of the problem. As America's population ages, unless it can boost its fertility rate, the country will have to either accept more immigrants to supplement native-born workers or else face the consequences of a shrinking labor force. The same applies to Japan, where low fertility would seem to have made immigration an economic necessity. But Japanese voters and public officials continue to resist proposal to invite migrants from elsewhere in Asia. Although Japan has the world's oldest population, immigrants make up only 2% of its residents, and the country imposes significant institutional barriers to discourage immigrants from settling permanently. Many democratic countries have used extreme measures to deter would-be asylum seekers from crossing into their borders. Australia has created offshore processing centers that prevent migrants from ever setting foot on the country's soil. The US has followed a Remain in Mexico policy to keep the Central American migrants at bay, and the EU criminalized rescue at sea in 2017. In lieu of permanently settling refugees, Denmark chose to issue temporary residency permit in many cases, a move supported by politicians on both right and the left. And now that the Danes are ready for those Syrians to leave, Denmark has instituted a plethora of policies designed to force them to return home, including a jewelry bill enticing the Danish government to seize the asylum seekers' assets to build the country's fund. Now, the countries who are geographically and economically in advantaged position, would they now choose to be a good Samaritan of the globe and open doors to let the immigrants walk in? By applying enough restrictions to keep the migrants away, would they fall short of economically succeeding in the age of skill shortage? How are the advanced economies asked to combat socio-economic challenges of the aging population? Or would the privileged countries stop getting involved in domestic and geopolitics of others, which presently create conflicts and drive displacement? With that, I will leave you today. Until then, look after yourself. I will meet you in another episode of Goodness. Thank you.